Okay, well, hello and welcome back to the New Testament journey. It's fantastic to be with you. And boy, on this journey, we're about to start a new mountain range, aren't we?
Oh, I love the Gospel of John so much. I think that, for me at least, John was one of those ones where you're like, I was a little, when I first read it, I just was like, wow, this stuff's cool. Mm-hmm. And then every time you go back to it, you're like, oh, it's like that wonderful granddad. You know, like it's like that granddad, and you kind of like, yeah, come on, tell me some more. And as you get older and as you move on in your faith, you know, like you recognise that you're changing, and then you see new aspects of, and you know, granddad gives you something new. So I love John. So yeah.
And it is different, isn't it? I mean, if somebody's just kind of coming into this from the first time and they were expecting kind of Matthew, Mark, Luke part 4.
Yeah.
It's different, isn't it?
Yeah, so I mean, again, when you first start reading the New Testament, you probably be a bit like, if you read through Matthew, Mark, and Luke, the reason we haven't done them back to back is you read them and like, hold on a minute, I think I've read this.
Yeah.
And they're so similar. They do bring different slants, but John, I like to think this is probably true. You know, again, with all this stuff about the early church, we're making best guesses.
Yeah.
But it seems that Mark and Matthew and Luke were all written around about the same time as each other. Mm-hmm. And then they fed the church, and they just put so much into the church. And then, old man John, probably the best friend of Jesus, kind of looking at the church, looking where it's going. Like it's been persecuted probably by the time he's written this. Come through the persecution. There are kind of all kinds of things going on, and he's... More or please. More or please. And it's like, come on, like, this is the Word who's become flesh.
Yeah.
And what he's doing is he's drawing like the Greek philosophy that's increasingly coming into the church through the Gentile believers. Mm-hmm. The Greek philosophy of the Word, of the Logos, of like, what's really true is ideas that are out there.
Okay.
And he's drawing them together with the Hebrew understanding of God's creator, and we meet him like in the creation.
Yeah.
And he's coming like these come together in this incredible awe-filled way. Like let's never lose sight of how incredible our God is.
Mm-hmm. Wowzers.
So I put in the devotional. I wrote, a jumbo jet has landed in my garden.
Smashes everything up.
It does. Because, like, this is a guy who's like, he's laying probably, I think it's him, he's laying with his head on Jesus' chest. And as he's gone through the years, that moment, that sense has only got more profound. Like, it's almost like he's brimming over with just incandescent awe of God.
Yeah. And who he met.
Oh!
Yeah. And the way that he writes, I mean, I don't want to say it's not history, because everything that he pulls from is history, but he's ordered it almost like an artist, hasn't he?
He's Quentin Tarantino.
Okay, tell me about that.
So, like when you got through Luke very clearly says, like, I'm a documentary filmmaker.
Yeah.
Like, I'm making you a documentary, it's going to give you a really clear... Now, it's cleverly done.
Yeah.
Like you might get a documentary these days on Obama or on even, let's try and find a non-political... Elon Musk. Mm-hmm. And it gives you interesting slants, but it's very deliberately giving you the documentary film of Jesus' life.
Yeah.
And then John is like Quentin Tarantino. You've got a slice of what happens at the end of his life put at the front with the temple. Mm-hmm. You've got an insight into these strange, long conversations between Jesus and people. Like you kind of like, hold on a minute, this just feels really different.
Yeah.
And it is different.
Yeah.
Because he's bringing in the awe of, this is the Word made flesh. This is God himself dwelling and being with people.
Yeah.
And this isn't documentary. Like you don't finish the book of John and think, oh, I know what Jesus' life was. There's nothing about his birth.
Yeah.
There's nothing really about the first part of his life, which is all out and about in the region of Judea and Galilee. It's all about this bit of time where he's in Jerusalem, really.
Yeah.
And it's all this sort of you could hear the music in the background, like the funk playing, because that's what it's like.
Yeah, very interesting, isn't it? Very interesting. I mean, shall we kick off with the start? Shall I
let's
read
do
the
it.
first
Go
few
for it.
verses?
Yeah.
In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. He was with God in the beginning. Through him all things were made. Without him nothing was made that has been made. In him was life, and that life was the light of all mankind. The light shines in the darkness, and the darkness has not overcome it.
So, if you want to get one of the kind of themes that John develops in his Tarantino style is light and darkness. And what you'll spot, if you use that as the lens that you read the Gospel of John through, you'll spot, God, everywhere there's light and darkness. And there's some really interesting things to pull out from that. Yeah. So the first one is the sort of the Nicodemus story. So when does Jesus visit Nicodemus?
In the night.
In the night, in the dark, because Nicodemus, who represents Israel, Jesus says, you're the teacher of Israel. So he's like the big boss man. He's like the smartest guy around.
Yeah.
And he is in the dark. And actually there's this fascinating thing which isn't directly relevant to the Nicodemus, but follows straight on the back of it, where he says, you read the scriptures because you think that in them you find life. But actually, you don't know me. You're not coming to me. And so what he's basically saying is the light that is coming into the world is embodied in Jesus as a person. And even those who hold the scriptures are living in darkness.
Yeah.
It's this... And he comes to his own, but his own did not receive him. So light and dark is a really significant theme. And Jesus really is... What he's wanting to do for you and for me and for Andy, primarily is switch the light on in our minds. So the primary thing that Jesus is seeking to do is not teach you a way to live. It's not even to forgive your sins. What he's looking to do is switch the light on, which has been switched off, which enables you to suddenly you see the world as it is. You see God as he is. And Jesus, over and over again, John 5, I only do what I see my Father doing. I don't entrust myself to people because I see what is inside people. So the thing that Jesus brings is perfect clarity of sight. Not just of God, but also of all creation and all people. So if you think about that, what an extraordinary vision of salvation that is. Imagine if you today, whatever you've done or you're going to do, any room you walked into, imagine if you just had perfect vision of what every single person was thinking, what there was in them, what their agenda was, perfect understanding of what God's goal was for this moment, what he was wanting to do through you, perfect understanding of yourself, perfect understanding of the times in which we live. Now that is the vision of salvation that Jesus has come to offer his people.
Yeah.
I think it's quite cool.
Amazing. It's different, isn't it? It's different to what we've seen before. It's a new angle in on the salvation that Jesus brings.
And so the Samaritan woman, another one of the famous stories. So Jesus comes, and what does he give that woman more than anything? He gives her understanding. Like he sees into her past.
Yeah.
So his light shines not just on her where she is, but he sees what's in her heart. And in his light shining into her heart, he realises this whole shadow of her sexual history and her relational history, whatever it is. And he casts his light into that shadowy place.
Yeah.
So as a minister of the kingdom now, our role more and more is to shine the light of Jesus into shadows to set people free from the darkness. And that's as so grace and light, mixed metaphors, but
yeah.
What truth is a beautiful gift. And we think of truth as something you whack people over the head with, but Jesus brings truth. It's as in revelation. It's the light being switched on.
Yeah.
And final thing on light, the natural, normal way of being is to be in light. Darkness is when the light's been removed.
Okay.
So you might think as a Christian, I'm the one who's doing something different, who's doing something that's abnormal. I'm abnormal because I've become a Christian rather than remaining as a non-Christian.
Yeah.
In our culture, like the people who are considered to be it's intellectually superior to be a cynic, to think it's just what you see. You know, if it can't be proved that God's real, then I won't believe it. But if it's in front of me and I see it, that's normal.
Yeah.
To believe and see and something that's beyond, which is God, is abnormal. Now Jesus says no. The normal is to believe in God. That's the light switched on. Is to see the word. Only that makes sense of the word. You who don't believe in God, you're the abnormal ones. You've got your light switched off.
Yeah.
So let me switch them on.
Yeah. So just to kind of tease it out a little bit, there is an aspect in which it doesn't bring something new. It just reveals what's there.
Absolutely. Yeah, that's a brilliant way to put it.
It's an amazing way to think about it. I mean, later we'll have that famous verse of knowing the truth and the truth will set you free.
Yes.
There's that in it, isn't there? I mean, as I'm reading through the Gospel of John, I'm keen to see this light and dark theme. So we've already mentioned with the Nicodemus story, so night and day will be another way into that, won't it?
Yeah.
And then I'm guessing blindness and sight
Oh, yes.
will also be one of the kind of flags of the light and darkness theme.
Yeah.
And even kind of weather and things like that. For example, the crucifixion, what happens with the light and the darkness then.
Brilliant. Those are brilliant examples. I mean, when you start looking, you see it everywhere. You know, when he calls Philip and Nathaniel, Jesus says, I saw you under the fig tree.
Yeah.
So his revelation is not just to the person. He sees in front of him, but he sees what's in them. Yeah. Something's happening in front, below a fig tree for Nathaniel. We actually don't know exactly what that was. Yeah. But there's a real sense of he sees and he enables you to see. Yeah. And so it goes through. It runs all the way through the whole of the gospel. You're right, and blindness and sight. Yeah, totally. Brilliant. I hope that makes sense. I hope that helps.
Yeah, really good to be able to look out for that. Tell me a little bit more about the verses we talked about right at the start. I mean, obviously there's an echoing of Genesis 1. Yeah. In the beginning, and John kind of putting Jesus right in the heart of creation, and then you also were saying that it relates with Greek thought in some way, with the Logos and a more kind of philosophical angle in on who Jesus is, rather than just the historical. This baby was born to fulfill a prophecy.
Yeah, so I mean, I think we think it was around about AD 90 that John was written, which has got a whole load of time for the temple to have been destroyed in AD 70. You've got 20 years really of the church being a Christian church rather than a part of Judaism. Because Judaism is kind of like really massive wound on it by the temple being destroyed by the Romans. And so as it becomes church, it begins to live totally and utterly and have a first generation of leaders who've grown up, who weren't with Jesus, who weren't Jews. Now leaders are in place who grew up trained in the philosophy of Plato, Aristotle, in the way of thinking that the Greeks had. And so they're now leaders in the church. Yeah. And Plato would if just really briefly to give you, many of us will know the imagery of the cave, and the idea in Plato is that this is not the real. This is not what we want. The real is out there. We're just shadows on the wall of a cave. We want to be able to turn around and see the real things. Yeah. And the way you do that is through ideas. So there's an idea of what's good and what's beautiful and what's true. And so you try and find those things. Now what John does really cleverly is he actually says, let's draw these things together. So it's not just ideas. We're not just trying to believe some stuff. It's not just if you say that Jesus is God, then that's it, you've got the right idea. It's actually you want to know God. You want to draw the idea down into the reality in your life and sense him. So the big thing about senses, not just sight, but senses. Does that make? I don't feel like I'm making a lot of sense.
No, that's good.
The key thing is this. In all of human society, we'll read many books and many ideas written by people who actually are not Christians. Now, we can do 2 or maybe 3 different things with those things. We can either say, well, it's rubbish because they don't know God, but the Bible never does that. Never does that. Or we can just totally accept it and think, yeah, this is true. But what John models for us here, and what you see Paul doing in his letters, and what actually has been the tradition of Christian thinkers all throughout history, is you say, yeah, do you know what? You are seeing something. Plato, Aristotle, whoever. You're seeing something, but this is what that actually is that you're seeing. You are seeing like a shadow. You are understanding something, but let me show you that shadow is actually this is God's creation. This is who He is. And what it does is it frees us up to all the sort of mainstream learning and understanding. We don't need to think badly of that. We don't be like, oh, the Christians didn't write this book, don't read it. No, you read it and you see actually this is beginning to point towards the truth. But the truth is the person Jesus. So this steers us to the person Jesus. So that's what John really does. Like you guys who love Logos, you guys who love the idea of philosophy of the word, yeah. That's good. Let me show you where that really takes you.
Amazing. I didn't realise kind of how informative it was on how we relate to the truth. As an aside, but as reading a little bit about the monasteries who kept the writings of antiquity and the Greek and the Romans, and without the Christian monks, many of those writings wouldn't have survived. And it was a similar kind of motivation of, we're not threatened by these truths. We will take them. We will critique. And we will use them to point to the ultimate truth.
Yes, I think we often read similar books, but the whole idea of the Dark Ages being when the Christians destroyed all learning outside of the Bible, it's just a lie.
Yeah, not true.
It's just a fabrication that was created by people who hated the church. But actually, the truth was, I think something like 95% of all of the literature we have of the Greek philosophers has come from the monasteries and the churches.
They kept it. Amazing. I loved your devotional when you put together in chapter 2, and it is this kind of Tarantino 2 scenes that are kind of spliced together, and you were just talking about how they reveal, I think you use like quasi-contradiction, it's like almost totally different part of Jesus' character. You got the water into wine, where he's kind of background almost needs to be ushered in, and then we've got the cleansing of the temple, where obviously he's on the front foot. Tell me a bit more about that.
Yeah, so I mean, I think as we move on in faith, our vision of Jesus should get more complex, not less complex. And there should be aspects of his personality that you think, I'm more surprised by him the more I know of him. So, wedding feast, all people kind of probably in his party, friends. He stays in the background, and he's kind of like, okay, let's make the wine, but let's keep it on the low. And many of us have experience of Jesus like that. Very gently and very compassionately, he turns our water into wine. He takes our need and he fills it. He takes something that feels like a desolation and turns it into a consolation. He over and over again he does that really gently and quietly. And in our tradition in Vineyard, this is what we do. You know, week in, week out, we're like, if you want to receive the Spirit, come forward and receive. And you know, if you can't be at the wedding banquet and drink the wine that Jesus has made from water, what are you doing? Like, this is the best bit. I still find it baffling. You're like, we're offering you wine of the new wine that Jesus has made. Why won't you drink it? I wonder if you drink it. I wonder. I don't want to be too in your face, because Jesus isn't like that here. He just serves it up.
Right, in kind of the bang in the middle of kind of normal life. I mean, wedding's a special occasion, but it's that kind of, in the context of the community, it's like he's just there and he just...
So there's a very gentle provision of his goodness. Very gentle. But immediately juxtaposed with that is this incredibly forceful, like imposition of his zeal and his holiness on the temple, and it's a rebuke like I've never received.
Yeah.
Thankfully.
Yeah.
He comes in and he tips the tables and he's like, this is not right. It's as loving.
Yeah.
It's as kind.
Yeah.
But it's a lot harder to swallow. I prefer having a goblet of wine than a whip at my back.
Yeah.
But, so this is what we have to embrace, though. This is our Saviour. And sometimes he will come at you with a whip.
What might that look like?
Well, I mean, I hasten to say this because we are church leaders, right? But one of the key things that was used as the whip of, and this has been hugely abused, but was the church, the discipline that the church brought, the community of church saying, what you're doing is not right.
Yeah.
And Paul talks about that, and it's all done in love. So there's a sense that actually, no, this isn't right. But then there's also the deep inner conviction that you personally would receive. Now, increasingly, I'm nervous about saying, of course, there's a personal relationship with God, but some people condemn themselves because they feel bad about themselves, and it's nonsense. It's just the lie of the enemy.
Yeah.
And others feel good about themselves.
Yeah.
How are you doing with the Lord? I'm doing really well, thanks. While they're kind of going and doing all these horrible things that you think, what?
Yeah.
I mean, how would the guys in the temple have said they're doing with the Lord? We're doing really well, thanks.
Yeah.
And Jesus is coming in and tipping over tables.
Yeah.
So your own personal perspective is quite tricky.
Yeah.
I wouldn't trust how well you think you're doing with the Lord. I've stopped asking people that question.
Really? Yeah.
But there is but you can't throw the baby out with the bathwater.
Yeah, yeah.
But the reality is that God will come to tip tables.
Yeah.
Because he wants to be incredibly generous and gentle towards you, and he's zealous for your holiness.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's that the house of prayer would be a house of prayer for all the nations, isn't it?
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, the reason he's zealous is because he's given you a role. He's made you... You're a light carrier. You're somebody who's meant to be sharing the light of the gospel with all nations.
Yeah.
And if your light is darkness, then... I mean, that's just...
Yeah.
It's like getting a torch and it's like covered with, you've taken it camping or whatever, and it's all covered with muck and stuff. And it's like getting rubbing it. Let's get the light shining again.
Clean, let's get it shining. Yeah.
So I guess in all of this, something that we'd want to pull out is that God is somebody. No, God is a being that should be profoundly evident in your senses. The Word has become flesh, and so there's a sensory nature of God. And I think we do this well, and I want to just push on this because I think it's so important. Is your God a God that you sense, smell, and hear, and see, and taste, and feel? Or is he just one that you think about and in theory believe in? And most of the Christian world at the moment in the West is going through a crisis because their God has been one that they've believed in with their mind. He's been a logos who's never become flesh for them. But he must be one you feel and smell and see and hear and take. He must be. And John chapter 6 is the most profound challenge on this. Where most people leave him and his disciples say, this is hard teaching.
Yeah.
Because he's basically saying to them, I need to become so real for you that you are drinking my blood.
Yeah.
Now that's horrible for us even in our culture, right? But in Jewish culture, that's as offensive as you could possibly get.
Yeah.
Because one thing that all Jews knew is you never drink blood of any animal or anything. The life's in the blood. Yeah. And that you eat his flesh. And if you don't do those things, you can have no part with him. You can't. And so basically what he's saying is if your word, it remains a concept, an idea, a word, a philosophy, a set of beliefs that you tick, a doctrine test that you pass. Oh, God's forgiven me for my sins because I believe in, I declare that Jesus Christ is Lord.
Yeah.
Like, John never has that Romans verse as like the whole thing is he has become flesh, and you must sense him.
Yeah.
And if you don't, you can't have a part with him.
I mean, you can, just as you're laying it out, you can see why they. The text says they began to grumble, and talk amongst themselves, and many walked away from him. It's a hard teaching. I mean, even in my heart, I feel like, okay, well, give me the 3 steps then. You know, how do I eat his flesh? How do I drink his blood?
Yeah, you know.
And then the kind of voice comes back where you've got to be born again. It doesn't make it any easier. Like,
yeah, I mean, this is written to Christians.
Yeah.
Who've probably been walking a path of faith, and some of them have been really severely persecuted and tested for it for a good period of time. And you get the idea that they're reading it, they're like, what?
Yeah.
Just check that again.
Yeah.
Because there is in our faith a wide open starting point that leads to a narrow road.
Yeah.
And the more that you go on in your faith, the more actually you realise this is really surprising.
Yeah.
Now, one thing I'd really want to stress in this is that John in no point ever wants to make it difficult. You quoted, I think, recently.
Yeah.
He writes this stuff so we can have life.
Yeah.
And so that we may believe, and in believing we can have life in his name. This is switching the light on for us. This is beautiful and wonderful.
Yeah.
But yeah, there is so much of this road ahead of every single one of us. You could be the most mature believer. You don't meet people who've been doing this thing as long as you. So much ahead.
Yeah.
So much surprise ahead. And joy and challenge, and it's the adventure of faith.
Yeah. Yeah. And I mean, it's John 6 is a difficult chapter, and I don't want to kind of shy away from that, because I think that is part of the almost disturbing that John wants to do in this letter of like, oh yeah, and I mean we talked about the kind of Tarantino thing. Sometimes the role of the artist is to shock and provoke, and you think it's one way, but actually it's totally different to that. But this words of Peter, this is kind of the comfort I cling on to at the end of John 6, where Peter says to him, "Lord, to whom shall we go? You have the words. Who else could we go to? You have the words of eternal life."
I mean, and again, we want to put all this stuff in the story, don't we? So John 6, it's like one of those moments, and you probably will have had them. Maybe you're having one right now, where you're like, God, I'm only really still in this because I think
no better options.
There is no other option, really. There's days like that, but that's not where the story ends, of course.
Yeah.
And John chapter 6 is where we finished the readings this week.
Sure.
But it goes through to the end of the Gospel.
Yeah.
And then that goes through into the book of Acts.
Yeah.
And then it goes through into John's letters and probably the book of Revelation. And at the end of the book of Revelation, it's like, how does the story end? It ends with just joy, eternal, forever, in the city.
Yeah.
Which is now where heaven and earth have become one.
Yeah.
And there is no darkness in it. It's only day. And there is no sun needed because God himself is our light.
Yeah.
And so, there's moments on your journey which are tough. But the journey is to the most incredible destination.
Yeah. I'm thinking through of all these characters we see in these first few chapters of John. We've referenced them, Nicodemus, the Samaritan woman. Jesus wasn't at all what they expected. But they were sure glad they met him.
Yeah.
Even though he put them through the ringer slightly.